Good morning, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well, and it's time to take a look at the other side of the ball now. That's right, we are going over to the defense, and we are going to make some predictions on the performance, the individual performances of some players on this defense. We're going to start at the front. We're going to start with the front line. Going to start with those guys in the trenches, which is probably the most concerning area for this team going into the season. But there is definitely going to be some good stuff and interesting stuff up there as well. So obviously, now that we're over to the defense, things get a little less spicy, I think. I think it's fair to say that pretty much every Seahawks fan expects this offense to be better than this defense. I think a lot of Seahawks fans expect this defense to be not good, maybe not even average. I do think it'll be better than last year, but a big reason why I believe that is because the defense last year was bad. It's hard to be worse. 25th in scoring, I think, which is tied for the worst defense under Carroll in his Seahawks tenure. Tied with the first year he was here, or I believe, by the way, which was a year that shouldn't even really count. So it would be hard to be worse than that. So I imagine they'll be better than that. I do think they're going to have a pretty good pass defense. They've really done a good job adding to their pass defense in terms of rushers and cover guys. They've done a good job stacking the secondary. The run defense, I think it'll continue to be a problem, but it won't be the problem that it was last year. Again, mostly because it can't be worse. Last year it was 30th. It's going to be really hard to be worse than 30th in a 32 team league. But is it going to be good enough for us to be a great team? That's going to be the hard part here. So we're going to start with the defensive line here. And again, there are going to be elements of how this defensive line plays that can't be captured with just numbers. I'm not trying to get some microscopic look at every player and figure out exactly how they're going to do. We're just going to kind of keep things broad here. So I've just got four numbers here: tackles, tackles for loss, sacks, and pressures. Obviously, that doesn't really encapsulate how good they are doing in run defense, which is probably the most important thing. So that's just going to be something we're going to have to kind of utilize the eye test with. That's going to be ultimately captured by how good our run defense is. If the guys on the interior line are playing the run well, we should be able to stop the run much better than we did last year. So that'll be just kind of a proof is in the pudding thing. But as for their individual play, I don't want to get away from how important it is that these guys make plays, get pressure, and get opposing quarterbacks to be uncomfortable. So let's go down the list. Top of the list is, of course, Dre'Mont Jones. He is the best defensive lineman on this team by a wide margin. And is he the best interior defensive lineman Pete Carroll has had in Seattle ever? Because I think he pretty clearly is, because most of the elite linemen that Carroll has had have been outside guys. Like the closest thing would be like Michael Bennett, and he played inside occasionally. He was mostly an outside guy, but guys like Cliff Averill and Frank Clark, and if you want to throw Jadeveon Clowney in there, they were outside guys primarily. So Dre'Mont Jones is probably the best interior defensive lineman that we have ever had. Most of the time, the interior defensive linemen we have are just guys. Dre'Mont Jones is capable of being more than just a guy. So tackles, I say basically slightly better than what he had last year. 54, so you're basically looking at about 3 tackles a game. He's going to have some games where he goes beast mode, but he's a lineman. There are going to be some games where he just doesn't make the plays. He just sets up other players to make the play. So very similar to what he did last year. Tackles for loss, I have 10, which is in the ballpark of what he did last season. I do think because he's on a defense that is going to probably be not as good as the Broncos defense was last season, there will be more numbers for him to get because he won't be competing against as many guys. But I don't think the discrepancy is going to be so huge that he puts up these ridiculous numbers. Like, he is going to be involved in a race to the quarterback with some of these edge guys. Probably not anyone else on the defensive line, but some of the edge guys can beat him to the punch. So I said 10 tackles for loss, pretty reasonable to me. Sacks, I went with 7. I think he had 7.5 last year, so roughly the same ballpark. Again, I think he's going to easily lead our defensive line in quarterback disruptions and pressures and sacks and all that. I don't think he's going to have some over-the-top J.J. Watt type season, but I think he'll be good, and I think he'll be effective, and I think we'll be grateful that we have him. At the end of the day, I think our edge crop is good enough to make sure that he's not the only guy trying to get to the quarterback. Now, pressures, real quick before I go into this. Let me be very clear here. These are pressures using the PFR standard, not the PFF standard. If you compare pressure count to PFR and PFF will usually have the pressures be like 2.5 times what PFR does, because PFF has a very soft standard for what constitutes a quarterback pressure, and PFR is a harsh critic. So keep that in mind. I said 24 pressures, which would be a small improvement over what he did last year. PFF would probably say he has 55 if PFR says he has 24. So understand that there's a definite discrepancy there. I prefer the PFR side, but you do what you will. Okay, next up we have our other starting defensive end. It's going to be Jarran Reed. Unfortunately, we couldn't quite bump him over to the bench, which is what I desired. But we do at least have a little bit of a healthier rotation, so we're not completely leaning on him at all times. I do think he'll still play fairly well. I gave him 51 tackles. Small downgrade from what he did last year in Green Bay. I think we're going to lean on him a little bit less than Green Bay did, and he is getting older, but he still has the ability to go out there and churn out snaps, give you a decent amount of action per game. Tackles for loss, I said 5. Again, he's getting older, not going to make as many plays in the backfield, but I think he's got some in the tank here. And sacks, I'm going to give him 4. A little bit more than he had for Green Bay last year. I think that his circumstances are actually going to be pretty good compared to what Green Bay was last year, but it's obviously not going to be anything great. And pressures, I went with 16. So nothing out of the ordinary for Jarran Reed. He'll be a passable starting caliber player, but definitely not somebody we're looking to keep around for a long time here. He'll be okay. Okay, now we're going to move to our other likely starter on the defensive line. We got Cameron Young, and Cameron Young, there's a lot on his shoulders, and I think he'll be playable, but I think we'll end up disappointed that he's our starter for most of the year. That's how I'll put it. So as a nose tackle, you're not going to accrue big stats. Understand that. I'm not asking Cameron Young to be some dominant defensive player. Just asking him to kind of hold his own out there and be part of an okay run defense. Statistically, if he can get to 24 tackles, I'd be okay with that. That would be like, even if he misses a few games, that's not even 2 a game. Seems reasonable for a rookie nose tackle. Tackles for loss, I just have 1. That's not really going to be his game. That's not really going to be what he does, especially as a rookie. Sacks, I just gave him 0.5. He's going to get in there, get lucky one time, bring down the quarterback maybe in a partnership with Nwosu or something. I don't know, but let's give him a half a sack. Pressures, I said 4. I think he'll get enough snaps this year because he is going to also have to play some on passing downs because we don't have a lot of depth at the nose tackle position to get those 4 pressures, but it's obviously not going to be a big part of his game. If you're talking about how effective Cameron Young will be as a player, I'm not super high on it. I don't think that he'll be terrible, but I don't see him being average even this year. And I think other players are going to have to step in and kind of make up for what Cameron Young doesn't bring to the table, which that's okay. I mean, it's not like our nose tackle situation was that much better last year after Al Woods got hurt. So we're used to it, but definitely something to think about going into next year. Next up, we're going to take a look at one of the key guys off the bench on the defensive line. It's Mike Morris. A lot of people really like him. I think that he's pretty clearly the number 3 defensive end behind Jones and Reed, so he'll get on the field a decent amount. But it would not surprise me if, as the season goes on, we end up feeling like we need the veterans out there as much as possible, so we end up playing Jones and Reed too much, and Mike Morris not as much as some people would like. But I think he will definitely play enough to do some stuff. I said 31 tackles, less than 2 a game. Honestly, Jones and Reed, between those 2 guys, you could probably expect one of those guys to at least miss a few games. Morris might get a few starts this year just because of that. So you got to factor that in as well. So 31 tackles. I said 4 tackles for loss. Nothing over the top, but effective quality play. Makes some nice plays in the backfield. If you watch him in college, he's got that playmaking ability. And I think once you get to year 2 or year 3, he could be a really good player. But this year, I think it's just going to be slowly working him in. I think by the end of the year, we'll have something pretty good with him. Sacks, I just went with 2. I don't think he's going to be the guy getting to the quarterback a lot this year, but I think he'll add something there. And I also gave him the double digit pressures, 10 pressures. And if he ends up advancing quickly enough to take the starting spot from Jarran Reed, I definitely think he could go beyond this. And I could see it happening, but I'm not going to bet on it right now. So these are my numbers for Mike Morris. They're modest. They're reasonable. I don't think I'm putting too much on him here. Next guy we're going to look at here is Bryan Mone. People are acting like he's going to play this year. Apparently, the worst case scenario is he's ready by mid-season. Best case scenario, he's ready for week 1. I don't know how, given the fact that he had a major injury right at the end of the year, but they're acting like he's going to be able to play, and I have a feeling we're going to need him. Now, he's not good, but we're going to need somebody out there who's big because Cam Young is a rookie, and we don't want to put too much on his shoulders. So I'm going to say Bryan Mone gets out there a decent amount just because we need somebody. I gave him 13 tackles. Again, numbers are not really the metric by which Bryan Mone defines himself as a player. I gave him 1 tackle for loss, sneaks in at some point, and no sacks. Again, not really his game. He's a 350-pound guy. 1 QB pressure, just at some point he sneaks in there and picks one up. But I'm not expecting much from Mone, but I think we will need his... We're just going to need to push him out there, and whatever we can get, because we're not going to have enough depth at the nose tackle spot. Going to need to rotate a little bit, and Cameron Young is just not going to be able to stay out there effectively for 60-plus snaps a game. Most nose tackles couldn't do that, but especially not a rookie like a Cameron Young. Okay, next up we have Mario Edwards, a late offseason signing. I believe we brought him in for a reason. I do think he will be the 4th defensive end, second guy off the bench. I think he'll get decent burn. I gave him 26 tackles. Seems perfectly reasonable to me. That's like a tackle and a half a game. He's not going to get big burn, but I think he will play consistently. I gave him 5 tackles for loss. He's proven to be somebody who makes a lot of things happen in the backfield, proven to be a little bit of a playmaker. I gave him 3 sacks as well, and I also gave him the 15 pressures. So you've got a workable, not necessarily good, but workable defensive end rotation with those 4 guys. The nose tackle rotation, maybe not so much, but that is a position we feel like we can get away with being a little bit cheap at. And look, I'm all for using advanced analytics to figure out what positions you can afford to be cheap at. And if nose tackle is one of those positions, then so be it. All right, next up we got Myles Adams. He's going to be your 5th defensive end, meaning he's not going to play that much. But I do think he's going to scoop up the occasional wayward snap. Like, oh, Draymond Jones got hurt at the end of the game, and we got to bump up everybody in the rotation. Myles Adams, you're playing a little bit for the rest of this game. Oh, Jarran Reed's missing a couple games in the middle of the season. Okay, Myles Adams, you're part of the rotation now. So not a lot, but a little bit. I gave him 14 tackles. I like Myles Adams. I think that he'll make the most of whatever little opportunities we give him. I gave him 1 tackle for loss. I gave him no sacks, and I gave him 2 pressures. I think we're going to come away with a pretty positive take on his season for 2023 for the little bit that he does play. And then finally, we got Jonah Tavai. I don't know how we're really planning on using him, but I'm going to say he plays a little bit, just like little spot duty. I gave him 4 tackles. I gave him no tackles for loss. I gave him no sacks, and I gave him no pressures. So he won't get meaningful time, but he'll get enough time to pick up a couple of stats. And that's it. That's it for the defensive line. You take a look at the totals that I put together here. I have 217 tackles, 27 for loss, 16 and a half sacks, 72 pressures from the defensive line alone. Still not really great, but for a 3-4 defense, it's totally workable. I don't think there's anything really wrong with it. You can win with that. It's better than last year's defensive line by a pretty wide margin, I think. Remember, a lot of our numbers last year on the defensive line came from guys like Quentin Jefferson, who put together some decent games, some decent statistical moments, some pretty okay stats, but they weren't really good players. I think we will get a little bit of better snap-to-snap play from defensive linemen this year. So those are my predictions for the 2023 Seahawks defensive line. Let me know what you guys think. Am I close? Let me know. See you guys later. Go Hawks.